Hey, good evening, and welcome into another edition of Marco and the Fish on the Walker Talks Radio Network. My name is the Fish, if you will, Seabass, if you're nasty. And on the other side of the thing, my man Marco Scateri doing his. And today, Marco, first of all, how you doing, big guy?
Doing amazing. Football's in the air. No better time like right now, right?
And I can see in your eyes you're ready to go. I'm pumped up too, man. Let's do this. We're going to start a little bit of what we might call a 2 or 3 part series, a whistle wetter for the NFL as we get ready for another season. We're already a week or two into the preseason. So we probably ought to get focused on the season and some of our thoughts that we have. Now we're going to do a couple of different things today. We'll go about 45 minutes or so. Of course, you know, the best laid plans. You never know. We might get on a roll and be here until 2 a.m. in the morning, however it goes. We'll touch a couple of different subjects this week and move to some other ones next week, getting everybody primed and ready for the NFL season. And I think today we're going to talk, Mark, I believe we're going to do the team that we expect to make the biggest jump in 24 from 23, teams that maybe make the biggest regressions from 23 to 24. And then we'll focus on one position group, see if we can come up with who has the best position group in the league. And I think we'll start off with one that's a lot of fun, the wide receiving core. Now, we won't do quarterbacks that much because it's really, I mean, are we really talking about depth when it comes to quarterbacks? No,
Exactly.
not. We're talking about that feature person because the reality is outside of injury or, you put somebody on the game because game's out of reach or something like that. It's all about that starting quarterback. So we'll do the other group. So we'll go biggest improvement, biggest regression, and wide receiving core in the NFL for 24. Sound like a plan to you?
Sounds great. Let's get at it.
Everybody, let's get ready to rock. It is time to get it on with Marco and the Fish. Let's start in the NFL. And Marco, I'll let you pick. You want to start off on the receiving core or you want to go with biggest improvement or biggest regression? We'll let you call it.
Let's do biggest regression because I got a take for this one. I am going to predict right now, I'm going to put it on the table. I think the Buffalo Bills are going to miss the playoffs this year.
Go home. It's mine too, but come up with somebody else. But let's hear your thoughts on Buffalo first.
Well, I got another one too, but first on Buffalo, the guys they lost. I mean, setting aside Stephon Diggs, that's obviously the big name guy. That's the headline. But Jordan Poyer and Tre'Davious White, I mean, Mitch Morse, their center, the core of the team's been gutted. And you look at the guys they added in the offseason. Look, I like Keon Coleman. I think he's going to be a stud. You know, what he did at Florida State was beyond impressive. But that's not enough to fill the void of a guy like Stephon Diggs. I mean, at the end of the day, Josh Allen can't do it all himself. And you look at that division. You look at Miami. I mean, Miami a hair away from winning that division last year. And then you look at the Jets. I mean, the Jets have a lot up in the air, but look, a healthy Aaron Rodgers, the Jets are going to win more football games. And the Jets, top to bottom, you know, all 53 guys arguably have one of the best rosters top to bottom in the NFL.
Mark certainly is not on the defensive side of the ball. They may be the best defense in football.
Absolutely.
But yes, they get Aaron Rodgers back, and it'll be interesting to see if they make a play for someone like a Devontae Adams more along the season as it goes, you know, to pair with guys like Wilson and Lazard. And, of course, Breece Hall, who's getting a ton of love to start the season. And I like Breece Hall, but, I mean, if you look, and I hadn't been playing fantasy football as much lately, but you look at Breece Hall, and he's rated right now as the number 2 back on the entire board. And I didn't realize there was that type of production to warrant that. So I don't really know where that is coming from. I like him quite a bit, but there are other running backs in this league who have produced way more than Breece Hall has. But as far as 24 goes, they love it.
Another thing onto that point too, Breece Hall, an absolute stud. I love him as a player, but looking behind him, Braylon Allen, the rookie out of Wisconsin, a guy I am very, very high on. I do attend the University of Wisconsin, so there might be a little bit of bias there, but a guy I got to watch play up and close the past couple of years, looked outstanding in that first preseason game. I think potentially the 1-2 punch of those guys, especially considering Hall's, injury past, taking some of the load off of him. I think that's a really underrated dynamic in that Jets team that really could be the difference maker at the end of the day.
I think the difference maker for the Jets is not about Aaron Rodgers. We know what he is, and he can. He doesn't have to jail receivers. They'll jail to him. I mean, he's got every throw. He's done everything. For the Jets, it's about the offensive line, and they bring in people like Tyron Smith, but it's if there is a question on this team, it's about that offensive line. And if they get that worked out, they could beat anybody in the NFL. So, I mean, if it works out that way. So we shall see about that. But we're sticking with the biggest regression. You felt like Buffalo would be that. I certainly have to say that I think that they are right up there for that. You mentioned on the back end. The only thing about that, guys like Poyer and whatnot, those guys were older. Those guys were banged up. I mean, Buffalo didn't want them at this point. So, were you going to run it back with those guys, re-sign them on something and run it back with those guys? They'd served their purpose, and they had been probably the best safety tandem for a couple of years, but it's kind of pushed past on that. So they got issues there. They do get Matt Milano back.
Mhm.
I think they've been holding him out of preseason, I do believe, which is probably a smarter move. But remember when he went down last year, that gutted that defense. You still have pieces like Ed Oliver, Von Miller. Of course, Von Miller is an amazing player, and I don't know if it's a matter of that hadn't fit well or injuries or just not comfortable, whatever the case may be, or we've seen the best football that Von Miller's ever going to play already. So you look on the offensive side of the ball, you mentioned losing two pieces off that offensive line. Stephon Diggs, somebody you didn't mention, though, I think bears mentioning is a season of Gabe Davis that he had last year. I don't think it's fair to just call him a compliment to Stephon Diggs. He made his way last year. He was a real prime target that you had to prepare for every Sunday. There's no doubt. So they lose both of those guys, and that's tough. You mentioned Keon Coleman, getting him in there, and I like it. Big frame, smooth, fluid, can win 50-50 balls. I like that quite a bit. I will say this. I do like the fact that James Cook established himself last year. So I don't have to go, because how many times have we seen they had all the other stuff, but they never could find a running back? I thought it was going to be Zach Moss. He was a bust. They traded him to Indy. He blew up. But in Buffalo, he did nothing. They traded for Nyheim Hines. He did absolutely nothing. They've been trying to fill that void in the backfield. And they feel like, especially if we look at what happened last year, they have probably found that guy in Dalvin Cook's younger brother, James Cook. So I do like that. And I don't know if it was a mismanagement of finances or what, but the cap hit them big time, and they had to make cuts on some people that they probably didn't want to. I just don't think that they had, especially as you mentioned in the AFC East, with the Jets and the Dolphins sitting right there, and I can make arguments for both of those being either one of those being top three AFC teams, because that. Yes, it's a regression for Buffalo because of some of the pieces they have to replay. Excuse me, I'll get it in a minute. Replace. More so what's happening in the division around them. So I do see that regression, and I think that they will, but I also think a lot of it has to do with the rapid improvement of Miami and New York.
Yeah, and one other point too. I think the news actually came down today. Matt Milano, torn bicep. So that's another problem.
You kidding me?
That's another problem. And we saw what losing him did to that defense last year. And to your point, like you mentioned before, that was kind of one of the bright spots. Almost, it's not, adding a guy, but you're getting him back. And then, you talk about a gut punch right there. That is,
they had said they were holding him out. I wonder if that's because, he had already done something. I don't know if it's an immediate injury or whatever happened today or whatever, but that's a gut. That's a gut punch. I guess, you're looking at Miller and Oliver and guys like that, but that, losing Matt Milano, from the way he played the game and the familiarity with the system and personnel, that would be one of the three people on this team that I think they could afford to lose the least.
No, exactly. A good off-ball linebacker, especially in the style of defense that you see Buffalo playing. That guy is the heart and soul of that defense. So that really hurts. Look, there's still talent, like you mentioned. Ed Oliver, an absolute stud. James Cook, a stud. Josh Allen's still one of the best quarterbacks. But at the end of the day, it's the depth. And I don't see the depth there for them to maintain that same level as being a championship contender, because that's been the tier. That's been the standard for Buffalo these past couple of years, is Super Bowl aspirations. I just don't see that this year.
All right, so I'm going to go with somebody else because Buffalo's been used. That would have probably been mine. And boy, I'm going to head to the other side. I'm going to go to the NFC. I've got a few that I could certainly be there, but I'm going to go over to the NFC. And it's real unfortunate because it looked like they were ready to, because this division, I'll say this division is as improved as maybe any division in the NFL over the last 3 years. And there's a couple of divisions out there that are really, AFC South is one of them. The NFC South starting to get much better. But pound for pound, the NFC North is all of the sudden, because it belonged to the Packers. I mean, it belonged to the Packers. Every now and then, Minnesota would jump up there, and then they do a little something. You could count on Detroit and Chicago to bring up the rear. Cannot count on that anymore. Detroit might be a top 4 team in this league right now. Green Bay, now that they've got everything worked out, and it looks like that's not going to slow down, there's no reason for me to believe that Green Bay doesn't have another phenomenal year. Chicago, the work that Ryan Poles has done has been absolutely amazing, and a complete and utter roster restructure in no time whatsoever. It's kind of reminiscent of the Texans in the AFC. They went from the outhouse to potentially the penthouse. They're not the air. They hadn't won anything yet, except for an AFC South title yesterday and last year and a playoff game. But I see the similarities there. They were both left for dead. They both now have their franchise quarterback, and things are much better off. And now the Bears team is filled with some veterans plus playmakers. 2 years ago it was DJ Moore, and that'll do it. That'd be about it. Well, now DJ Moore, I can make an argument for you, and I won't because Rome Odunze still has to do it. But I could make an argument that DJ Moore's the 3 in Chicago. So if that's the case, and if Caleb Williams, which by the way, if you watched him in that preseason game last week, man, you didn't see him for a long time, but he flashed a couple of things, especially on a little flip out. Did you see when it was breaking down to the left hash? Ended up being a 30-yard gain when it should have been either incomplete or a sack. Caleb Williams' ability to extend a play is the reason that play went the way that it did. And he had a nice connection on a go route down the right sideline. I don't remember who it was. I think it was one of the second or third team receivers. But he flashed a little bit. And to get to my point, there's Minnesota. Now, Minnesota, Kirk Cousins heads to Atlanta. They draft J.J. McCarthy. And everybody's like, J.J. McCarthy? Well, I know you need a quarterback, but all right, I guess. He comes to Minnesota and looks like he's been there for 20 years. And it's like I told you, we were talking about this after it happened. I said, the thing that J.J. McCarthy has above everything else, he's a talented player. There's no doubt about it. But, Marco, he's a winner. He's a winner. He's a winner. You lose him for the season before it ever gets started. You lose your defensive backs in the offseason in a tragic accident. You have Jordan Addison getting in trouble for the same kind of stuff. Luckily, didn't end up in any type of tragedy or anything like that. Now you don't have J.J. McCarthy. While the rest of the division continues to ascend, Minnesota, you don't have Daniil Hunter anymore because now he's signed with the Houston Texans. And I like Minnesota. They're kind of a blue-collar team, but, to me, I think they take a step back, and it looks like to me, because I think Chicago does make a big improvement. We'll talk about them later, but I could see Minnesota bringing up the rear there in the NFC North, especially with J.J. McCarthy being out. I think they regress this year. I don't think it's a true indicator of what the future looks like for this team, but I think the current right now is it'd be hard for me to be overly optimistic if I were a Viking fan.
Yeah, I would definitely have to agree with you to your point of them bringing up the rear of that division. The way I see it playing out, like you said, Chicago taking that leap forward. We know what Green Bay is going to be. We know what Detroit's going to be. These are 2 elite teams in my mind, at least. That's one of the toughest divisions in football, and Minnesota just doesn't have the guns to kind of match up with those guys. What I will say, though, with the JJ injury, I think obviously long-term, look, you draft a quarterback in the first round, he's out for the season. That's a catastrophe, right? But what I will say is I think I'm a little bit higher on Sam Darnold in terms of that filling in role than the general public is. Now look at Sam Darnold's career. He could not have had 2 worse situations to start in. He had the Adam Gase Jets, and then he has the dumpster fire that Carolina's been the past couple of years. Look, I'm not saying he's going to come out and be an all-pro and, break records and whatnot, but look, he spends a year in the Kyle Shanahan system. He comes in, he's thrown to Justin Jefferson. Again, I agree with you to your point that they're going to probably be last place in that division, but I do think I'm a little bit higher in terms of the gap between Darnold and McCarthy. Because at the end of the day, McCarthy, look, he looks good, but he's an unproven commodity at the end of the day. You can win in Michigan, you can win in college football. It's a whole different beast when you're in the National Football League and you're playing against grown men. So I think Darnold might be a little bit better than people are expecting in terms of filling in. Although, to your point, they didn't really make many major improvements to that overall roster when everybody else in that division got better. You look at the Packers adding a guy like Josh Jacobs. That's one of my favorite moves in the entire offseason. Everyone
don't have Aaron Jones now. That's a lateral move at best for me.
Yeah, no, I mean, but I just think,
By the
you
way,
know,
still in the division on this Minnesota team we're talking about.
yeah,
To me, I like Josh Jacobs, and he led the league in rushing 2 years ago. But to me, that at best is a lateral move.
I don't know. I think Josh Jacobs, especially his running style, he's a guy. He'll get those tough physical yards. He'll put his shoulder pads down. He'll run through a guy's face. I really think he fits the
That's why they
identity of
made
what
Nate
that.
Dillon on that roster. That's his
Yeah,
job.
and
That's what he
well, now
does.
you got two of them. Now you got two of them. I mean, I think that's a 1-2 punch. I think you're a little low on Josh Jacobs. I think Josh Jacobs is an
Man,
upgrade from Aaron Jones. Personally,
Josh
I think.
Jacobs is a fine running back. There's no doubt. I like him, but I would say that I don't think when they're both healthy and ready to go, assume have Aaron Jones. Be just frankly honest with you, and it's not a shot at Josh Jacobs, who I do like quite a bit. Just don't see that as the type of move that elevates really anything. I mean, I'm looking at this team. I'm looking at this Minnesota team, and by the way, to your point with Sam Darnold, I would love to be high on Sam Darnold. I would, but I'll ask you this, Marco, because it's they're reasons, not excuses. So I appreciate that. But if I would have said to you, okay, CJ Stroud and put him on that Jets team, how would he have done?
A
Take
lot better.
Jordan Love and put him on that team and see how he done. Have Justin Herbert and see how he would have done on that team. And I can keep doing this, and I think you realize when we do that, we start realizing, yeah, there's just a it's a difference between those caliber quarterbacks and a guy like Sam Darnold. He's fine. He can get you from A to B if necessary if you don't have another thing, but you don't want to hit your wagon to him for a season. I mean, I'll say this. I think he can produce, I think a max production by Sam Darnold would be what you would get from a max production season from a guy like Grief. I've gone blank. What's quarterback last year, Chuck? No, good grief.
Gardner
Gardner,
Minshew.
yeah, Gardner Minshew. I think their max and their max potential is about the same. And
Yeah.
I can't win. I can't win division. I can keep a ship afloat, but I'm not trying to keep a ship afloat. I'm trying to win a championship, and I don't
Well,
think we can do that.
I would agree with you, but I think that's my overall point, though, is that I do think he can keep the ship afloat. And I think the general discourse surrounding this injury is that they're going to bottom out and be a top 3 draft pick. I think, to your point of your analogy of, you put Stroud on the Jets, you put, Herbert on the Jets. I would agree with you. They would do a lot better than Darnold. But what I would say is I think our perception of both of those guys would be significantly different because I don't think they would perform in the same ways that they have. I think that's the key point I'm trying to get at with Darnold is that, look, I don't think he's necessarily maybe a starting caliber quarterback in the NFL. At the end of the day, you have to show that for me to believe that. But what I am saying is the perception we have of him as a low end guy who, frankly, is a backup, a low end backup at best. I think that perception's a little warped just based on the situations he's been in. At the end of the day, a guy can only do so much in Carolina. I mean, could anybody have succeeded in Carolina? Sure, CJ Stroud, Justin Herbert, guys like that would have done a lot better. Would have won some more games. But at the end of the day, CJ Stroud isn't taking the Panthers to an NFC Championship game, in my opinion. It just, the situation wasn't.
Might also be the worst roster in a while for a long time. Now, it is what it is, but I mean, they gave up the farm to get Rice, and we'll see if that pans out. It's probably unfair to him to expect Rice to be able to do that because they are so far behind the 8 ball with all this. We'll see. Think in this league, man, think about it like this. Tell me the NFL team that out there that has a premium quarterback, but is a bad football team.
The Chargers. I don't think the
Chargers aren't a bad football team.
I don't know.
Middle of the road team. The Chargers' problem to me has been coaching for the last couple of years. And I guarantee you, now I understand that Mike Williams and Keenan Allen are not there, but there are enough pieces on that defensive side of the ball. They've got their book tackles now that they drafted off in the first round. And, Gus Edwards is an interesting guy. He's a tough runner, makes sense in a Jim Harbaugh type of offense. The Chargers aren't a bad football team. The Chargers were coached poorly. Stanley over the last couple of years. He's gone now. And now you have a proven head football coach. And for the personnel that they have, because Justin Herbert is dealing with that the plantar fascia, that is a thing that can linger all season long. So I don't know. Remember, they're counting on a rookie because the receiving core. What are you pinning on? Johnson? You've been on Quinn Johnson with Josh
Joshua
Palmer.
Pittman.
You know,
Yeah.
what are we talking about? Lad McConkey needs to be great immediately. You're going to see a whole heap and helping in that run game, which you will anyway. But I don't consider them a poor team. I think Justin Herbert's a great quarterback on an average team with a poor coach. That's
Well,
what
see,
it's
that's
been to this point. Not now. You know, Harbaugh changes that. In my opinion, I look at it and I look at this league and I say, okay, I mean, it's right. The writing's on the wall. Great quarterbacks do not play on bad football teams after they've been established. You know, think about it. You look at the AFC South, there are great quarterbacks there. There's one for sure.
there's one we know for sure. Maybe two.
I hate to say that the jury's out on Trevor Lawrence, but I think the jury's,
It's fair.
I don't know yet. And maybe holding it against him that he was number one pick of draft. Maybe I'm holding that against him and probably shouldn't, but he's just been good, not great. Expected greatness. Haven't got that yet.
But I think that's a fair thing to hold him to at the end of the day. I mean, not just an ordinary number one pick in the draft. I mean, this is a guy we've been hearing about since his freshman year when he wins the national championship, that this was going to be a guy who was going to come in, he was going to change a franchise, right? And I think it's completely fair to say that the jury's still out on Trevor Lawrence. Now, what I will say, though, is I think I am a little bit higher on Jacksonville this year than a lot of other people. I think Jacksonville was a team coming into last year. Almost we expected them to do what Houston did, right? And I think, look, things obviously didn't go their way, especially at the end of the season. But it was a lot of close, the NFL is there's such razor thin margins between a win and a loss, right? A playoff team, not a playoff team. I still expect Houston to be the dominant force in that division. But I would expect Jacksonville to be contending for a playoff spot, if not getting in a playoff spot. I believe in Trevor Lawrence. I agree with you that the jury is still out, but I believe in him. I believe that he has the intangibles. He has, underrated athleticism, God-given, arm talent. I mean, good head on his shoulders. I think he's everything you want a quarterback to be. He just hasn't done it yet. It hasn't fully clicked exactly. And that's frustrating, honestly. But yeah.
And I would love to come on here and say, don't forget about the Colts, but I'm not going to go into an hour-long diatribe about why Chris Ballard is the most ridiculous general manager in football, though it is true. I cannot believe that with the deepest free agency safety class in decades, he spent nothing, not a penny on one. He brought two people into the camp this year. Raekwon Davis, who was a backup defensive tackle who has not taken a snap because of blood pressure. And the only other addition that he made, despite having top 5 money, was a backup quarterback who, if everything goes right, never plays and did not address.
No, I mean, you're
monster. And it's crazy because everybody in the world understands and realizes that and think about this, their first 3 quarterbacks they face are going to be C.J. Stroud, Jordan Love, and Caleb Williams. And the Texans, Packers, and Bears receiving core with the most god-awful secondary in the NFL. He didn't spend a penny on it. And he has still to this day $25 million of cap money to use. And he spent it on no one, as if he gets a bonus for saving money. It's the craziest thing. So if you want to talk regression, I may consider that, but we'll get to that in just a minute. But I think we both agree about Buffalo. I'll add Minnesota. We may not be on the same page there, but I see a regression from both of those. Let's talk about it. Maybe last year it didn't quite work out for them, and this year things have changed. They've been active for whatever reason. Maybe somebody matures. Maybe there was a trade. Maybe it's draft picks. Who knows? Let's talk about that. I'll start with this one. I'll start with the improve. And this is really on the nose, quite obvious. Been headlines all week long. The Atlanta Falcons, guys. I mean, first of all, I'm a Raheem Morris fan. Players love to play for Raheem Morris. Didn't really overall work out in Tampa. I think it could work out here in Atlanta. I really believe that. And now you bring in Kirk Cousins, and what's great about this, they drafted Michael Penix in the top 10, and we were like, what? But the reality is after 1 year, they have the ability to get out of that contract if they choose to do so. If Michael Penix shows that he's ready to handle the load and they can get out of that thing. And so maybe they do, maybe they don't. If you take a look there, okay, you bring in a guy like Kirk Cousins, who all he's ever done in his career is produce. So I have no reason to believe that he won't do that now. And you have a second-year player in Bijan Robinson, who's maybe pound for pound the best young running back in the NFL. Maybe. I mean, that's certainly a debatable. I think Kirk Cousins, who benefits the most from Kirk Cousins? I think Kyle Pitts does. I think Kyle Pitts
Mhm.
does. The highest drafted tight end in NFL history, went fourth overall, and has basically done squat in, was it 3 years? He's been there 3 years, I think it is. It's 2 or 3 years. I think it's 3 years. And
Yeah.
it's just done nothing. And I don't know if that's all him or the product of the offense and inability to get him the ball, whatever the case may be. But now you have Kirk Cousins, B. John Robinson, Drake London, who is a heck of a wide receiver, but we don't see him a lot, so not a lot of people talk about him outside of things like fantasy or you're a Falcons fan. But he's one of the best young receivers in the game. You give that offense all these things, and now you look over on the other side of the ball, and the Patriots trade to Atlanta Matthew Judon, who's been the best defensive player on that roster for the last couple of years, for a third. I'll take that all day long with that type of veteran pass rush production. And then, and this is where I get mad about the Colts all over again. Justin ended up doing a 1-year deal. There was really a lot of thought that this was going to be a 2-year type of deal. But maybe Justin thinks, look, I can get the best singular deal each year, just play out 1-year contracts, and be kind of a rental, because that's what he signed. 1 year, a paltry $8 million for one of the best playmaking safeties in the game, voted by his peers as the number 57 overall player in the entire league. And he sat there until August the 15th. And so I thought, okay, well, then you just got these teams who need one, but they're not willing to give 2 years, or they're not willing to go $13-14 million. He signed for $8 million. That's basically free for Justin Simmons. So now on the front end, you've got Judon, and on the back end, you've got Simmons, two great proven playmakers that were not on that defense 3 days ago. And there they are now. So the additions to go along with Raheem Morris, to me, I don't know that any single team has improved their roster and their chances overall more so than the Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you for sure. And I think a big part of the Falcons, us projecting for them to improve too, is the situation they're in within their division, right? Where there's not really a clear-cut team that they're trying to knock off the pedestal. Obviously, Tampa Bay wins that division last year, but Tampa Bay also, they had their own, issues this own offseason. Losing a guy like losing a guy like Shaquille Barrett, though, that's going to hurt. And, Tampa Bay, it's not like they ran away with this division last year. Now, I like Baker Mayfield as much as the next guy, but it's not exactly like they have a stranglehold, I guess is what I'm saying, the way the team's currently constructed. I love Atlanta. You mentioned the guys they added on defense. Let's not forget the guys they already had, too. A guy like A.J. Terrell, I mean, how's he going to benefit from a guy like Justin Fields behind him? A guy like Grady Jarrett on the line, I mean, adding Matthew Judon, he's going to feast now, So I'm fully in agreement with you. Also, I think another important point to mention too, you mentioned adding Raheem Morris, but I also think removing Arthur Smith too. We kind of touched on it with Kyle Pitts not being utilized, and it wasn't just him either. We saw weird games where Tyler Algier was getting a majority of carries over Bijan. Drake London not really getting the ball as much as a guy of his caliber should. It seems like the overall culture in Atlanta has shifted, the overall mentality. They seem to be in a very win-now mindset. I love the pick. I think Atlanta, I'm going to stray away from saying pencil them into the playoffs, but if I was a betting man, they'd have my money to win that division. And once you're in,
I would say this. I got into a discussion with somebody on, and I'm not calling it X. Sorry, Leon. Twitter. Sorry, that's just the old man in me. Became yesterday, they said they felt like Atlanta is a Super Bowl contender. And I am not there with that. I love the additions. I think they have a chance to win the South. I think they could absolutely do that. But I don't care who they added. The NFC right now has 4 dominant teams in it. And your answer is not San Francisco, Philly, Detroit, and Green Bay, then I don't know what you're looking at. And I don't mean you specifically, but those are clearly the 4 best teams in the NFC. Atlanta has done a lot, but they haven't passed any of those teams in my mind.
No, I would agree with you. What I will say, I fully agree with you that they're definitely, I wouldn't put them on the level of Super Bowl contender. But what I'll say is coming into last season, I didn't see a scenario in which Atlanta could possibly make the Super Bowl and win it. Now, I can see, some guys get injured on some other teams. They get some bounces the right way, maybe some favorable matchups. Look, I don't think it's going to happen, but is it in the realm of possibilities? If you come back and you say, I'm from the future and Atlanta made the Super Bowl, I'd be surprised, but I could potentially see it happening. And I think that's kind of where they're at, is definitely a tier below those teams that we expect to be contending, but above that kind of middle of the pack, directionless, 7-8 wins every season, because that's where kind of they were stuck in my eyes for the past couple of years.
All right, so you don't get to use my team. So that means we've got one more in regards to biggest improvement. The first one we've mentioned is Atlanta. Your selection is?
Yeah, so I was going to go with Atlanta off the bat, but I do have another good one. Have we forgotten about the Cincinnati Bengals fish? I mean, like, let's talk about this for a second. Cincinnati was a team for the past couple of years, talked up there with and the likes of Kansas City with Buffalo, the top horses of the AFC. Obviously, Joe Burrow going down last year totally killed their season. Joe Burrow's going to be back. Look, and they lost some guys. They lost Joe Mixon. They lost Tyler Boyd. That's going to hurt. But at the end of the day, they still have T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. I mean, that's two legitimate number one wide receivers, at least in my eyes, right there. The defense, yeah, the defense too. I mean, the defense definitely struggled a little bit last year with the loss of Jesse Bates to Atlanta, like we were talking about. But they added some guys. Look, I like Zach Taylor a lot, and this hurts me to say as a Steelers fan too. I despise Cincinnati. I don't want to see him do well, but it just feels like no one's talking about Cincinnati this year. And I mean, look, it's a hard division, the AFC North. The AFC in general is stacked, but let's not act like if Joe Burrow is healthy for the entire year, that Cincinnati's not going to win 9 or 10 games, because I just don't see a world where Joe Burrow's healthy, Joe Burrow's doing what we know he's capable of doing. I mean, look, the Bengals, they finished in last place in that division last year. I just don't see that happening again. I think healthy Joe Burrow, Bengals in the playoffs, I think that's a pretty safe bet.
I think it's the toughest division in the entire league, to be honest with you, because there's not anything that you would even consider a bad football team in that division if everything goes right. Couple things. They don't have Brian Callahan anymore. He's now coach of the Tennessee Titans. How much does that matter? How much of the Bengals' success offensively was about him? We'll find out. We're going to find out. You mentioned Joe Mixon and the Bengals were comfortable enough to trade him to Houston. They bring in Zach Moss. I like Zach Moss quite a bit. Now, one of their running backs went down the last day or two. Cincinnati's did. It wasn't Zach Moss. Is it Evans? It might have been. Was it Chris Evans? I think it was that may have went down. You double check on that if you get a chance.
Yeah, Chris Evans. Yeah, season-ending injury.
Yeah. But with with Zach Moss, Zach Moss, halfway through the season last year was the number 2 rusher in the NFL, just behind Christian McCaffrey at one point, and he was very successful. But the only thing I would say about that, and we saw hints of it at the end of 22, you remember that, Chuck? Moss was starting as well. Bell, if he can carry that over. And, of course, Taylor ends up, not playing all those games. And so Moss got to get in there and made the most of it. The Moss from last year, if they get that in Cincinnati, then, hey, I think there's if not an improvement over Mixon, right there at it. If they get the Buffalo version of Zach Moss, which could happen, then there's going to be a definite regression in the backfield. You mentioned losing Tyler Boyd. Now, the Tyler Boyd of last year is not a loss. Tyler Boyd had a horrible year last year. And it could have been for a million different reasons. And maybe there's a change of scenery. But Tyler Boyd stacked enough good football in his career for me to say that is a loss. We'll certainly ride with that. I think the thing that Cincinnati has the issue with is just the overall strength of the rest of that division. Your Pittsburgh Steelers are on the come up. They're not there yet. I don't think they have their quarterback on that roster. I think you probably feel that way too, but they're starting to piece that offensive line together. I think, will have Brandon Ayuk. And I look a year from now and I think, okay, of course, it depends on if Pickens, you never know with George Pickens, and not about his ability, just about
everything else. Yeah.
I will tell you this, a 1-2 punch of George Pickens and Brandon Ayuk is going to make any quarterback look good. There's no doubt about it. The running game is what's the young man say? Is it Pierce? What was the young man's name that came in last year and was so good?
Jalen Warren.
Said Pierce was Warren. That's it. I really liked him a lot. I don't think he's a feature back in this league. I don't think they have one. And I think that's going to be a problem when you look at the front seven of Baltimore, Cleveland, and Cincinnati. Pittsburgh's improved. I don't think there's any question about that, but I don't know that equates to winning or making the playoffs this year. I think they're an improved team, but the AFC, as you well know, is an absolute gauntlet. Cincinnati, I don't know. I mean, it's not that I've forgotten about them, and I like them quite a bit. I do. I think Joe Burrow's a top 3-4 quarterback in this league. They don't have a bunch of holes. I think they're just, unfortunately, in the wrong division for the holes that they do have.
Yeah, and I think, I agree with you. The AFC North, I think it's the toughest division in football. I think, like we saw last year, we're going to see three teams from that division making the playoffs. But I see Cleveland dropping down, out, bottoming out. I'm not a believer in Deshaun Watson. I think, how telling is it that that team got better with Joe Flacco coming off the couch playing quarterback? I mean, I haven't seen it with Deshaun Watson. I watch Browns games. I've seen him play live actually in Pittsburgh. It's just the connect isn't there. And look, they added a guy like Jerry Jeudy. I like that. And don't get me wrong, that defense is legit. That defense is scary. But I don't know. I feel like the Browns, they had a couple bounces. We don't know what's going to happen with Nick Chubb coming back. I mean, talk about a guy who's been through it with his legs. I mean, injury after injury going back to college.
Now, let me say this. Now, when I say what I'm about to say, I'm not saying that any of them were on the caliber of Nick Chubb, but everybody who's gone in the Cleveland backfield has succeeded. They've been able to run football with whoever they have. And you know what was interesting, and I did not realize this, but Amari Cooper is the first Brown receiver in history to have back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons.
Oh my God.
If you look at the litany of quarterbacks they went through, for 2 decades just about, it makes sense. But if you take a look at that, and you mentioned the addition in the receiving corps, and put that with Amari Cooper and the Davis kid, the kid they traded for from the Jets, that's so fast. Is it Davis? Am I have the name right? Kid they traded.
Oh, Elijah Moore.
Excuse me, Elijah Moore. Yeah, kid that they traded for with the Jets, with the speed merchant, right? Yeah. So I'm trying to envision a scenario in which Deshaun Watson has Nick Chubb healthy and Jerry Jeudy, who's quick as he can be, Elijah Moore, and Amari Cooper. Not to mention, they've got one of the most underrated tight ends in David Njoku in the league. Their offensive line is intact. They've been trying to baby their tackles a little bit in the offseason, make sure they're healthy. You got a guy like Joel Bitonio who's been there for 7-8 years, just a heartbeat of that offensive line. The defensive unit, period, that front seven, absolutely stacked. They got one of the 2 best pass rushers in the game. Their secondary's intact. It comes down to what you're talking about with Deshaun Watson. Here's what I know to be true. The Houston version of Deshaun Watson is as good as anybody in this league. Mm-hmm. That's 4 years removed almost now. And we haven't seen anything that looks remotely like that. With what they have from a personnel standpoint, if Deshaun Watson can recapture that, I'm not saying it's going to be worth the $250 million that they paid and then replenish an entire organization who then went and beat them in the playoffs. I would say that if they get all that together, the personnel that they have is good enough to win that division. And you know how high I am on the Ravens. So if I'm saying that, because let's not forget, the Cleveland Browns, guys, they were a playoff team. But for all that happened last year, they still made the playoffs last year in the rough AFC. So personnel, it's there. Production, if they get it, look out.
I agree with you to your point that with the personnel that they have, if Deshaun Watson can put it all together, that they could be not just, a contender to win that division, but a potential Super Bowl contender. I'm just saying that I don't think Deshaun Watson's going to be able to do that. I think quarterback is such a mental position, and the guy has just looked like doesn't have confidence in himself. And then what does that do to his head seeing the team get better when however old Joe Flacco is, comes in and improves that team? I don't know. I don't think that we're going to see Houston Deshaun Watson again. I think his best days are long behind him. I think he's what holds this team back from being a true contender, not just for the Super Bowl, but for the division. And I think his play is going to be the reason they're going to regress out of that playoff spot.
If you are right about that, the Deshaun Watson contract, remember what I say the contract, they gave up everything and gave him $250 million. If that's the way this plays out, is this the worst contract in NFL history?
I think it has to be. Yeah, considering especially what the window that they have with the guys that they have at every other position, whiffing that badly, giving up all the draft capital, all that cap space too, to dedicate to him. I would absolutely say so. I think, when they made that trade, I said to my friends, I was like, they don't win a Super Bowl off this trade. It's a failure. But yeah, I think if he continues to regress and they miss the playoffs with him in a full season, and we look back and we say the best Browns team we saw was the Browns team with Joe Flacco in this era, I think it has to be the worst move, contract, however you want to phrase it, in NFL history.
Well, I'll tell you, it's interesting because it will be rivaled by a contract that happened after that, or right around the same time. Because, friends, take a look at the Denver Broncos football team. in that organization. And what they gave up and the cap hit, they wanted him out of that organization so bad. What was that cap hit space? $87 million? I think it was not only the biggest ever, it was more than I think, if I may have the numbers wrong, either the top 3 or 4 other teams with their cap hits in the league combined was not as much as Denver's cap hit with just Russell Wilson being let go from the organization. That is mind-bending. That's on another kind of level. And boy, they're buried. They better hope Bo Nix turns out. If he does, that'll help them immensely, and they can start to slowly rebuild that thing with our franchise quarterback on a rookie contract. But that one was way bad too. So both of those teams are trying to come out from under the ashes. But so for our biggest improvement, we've got the Falcons. And who was your team? Cincinnati? Is that who you said it was?
Cincinnati, yeah.
Because they finished division last year. So yeah, that makes sense. All right, one more thing to talk about here, and that's the receiving core. I'll let you go first. I can't imagine we don't have the same answer, but one never knows. Marco, you're up first.
Yeah, so my number one receiving core in the NFL this season. Now, I actually struggled with this one a little bit between 2 teams, but I'm going to have to give it to the Houston Texans. With the addition of Stephon Diggs, with Tank Dell and Nico Collins, 2 of my favorite young receivers in the NFL. I think that pair alone could have carried the Texans in the years moving forward. Adding a guy like Stephon Diggs to that equation, I mean, especially with obviously we are just talking about the receivers, but in the broader context of the team, with CJ Stroud, with Dalton Schultz, with Joe Mixon, offense in general is going to be scary. Now, do you want me to say the other team I was on the fence with between them?
See if I can guess it.
Yeah.
My eyes, Marco. Send it to me in wavelengths.
AFC.
I don't know how it's not Miami. Don't know how it wouldn't be Miami. I mean, just with Cheetah, Jalen Waddle alone right there, the amount of speed that they have, that offense, and 2 of the fastest running backs in the NFL as well. Go along with that, and a versatile and mobile quarterback, a great play caller. That receiving core is really dangerous. I've said it earlier a couple weeks ago. If Miami's defense comes together, if they replace Christian Wilkins on that defensive line, and I don't think Xavier Howard, I think he's gone. I think he's done. He's still looking for a team right now, and so I got to replace a few people like Jalen Phillips. I love Jalen Phillips. He's a great guy to build around. That defense comes through, they're going to be tough to beat. But I cannot imagine. Look, I have the same 2 teams as you: Houston, Miami. Now, I will say this: if injuries weren't an issue, it will be a lot of fun to watch Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, and Hollywood Brown. But Hollywood Brown's already gone down. Whatever time that's going to look like, they're going to be impossible to do with Pacheco and some quarterback they've got as well ought to do. And they got a guy named Travis Kelce. So that could be really good. But I don't know how anybody doesn't land down in Harris County, Texas, because I agree with you. Bringing over Stephon Diggs, one of the best players in the game at the position, but Tank Dell and Nico Collins. And the awesome part about that for the Texans is that's every level of the route tree. And see, that's where it's every level. They have that, and they have it covered. To go with CJ Stroud. They bring in defensive playmakers like Neil Hunter, to go opposite of Will Anderson. Nico Autry's going to be out for 6 weeks, obviously. But Shire, what is it? Shire, I think is the cat from the Titans last year, who's over there now, tackling machine. The Texans are going to be tough to deal with. And I think in week 1, the Texans are receiving course probably going to do something that has never been done before. My bold prediction, like they make on Sunday mornings, my bold prediction for week 1, the Texans receiving core of Tank Dell, Nico Collins, and of course, Stephon Diggs, all 3 of them go for over 300 yards receiving in the first game. That's a joke, of course, but it speaks to how bad that Colts secondary is going to get cooked. Nico Collins did it by himself last year. There was no Tank Dell in that game. There was no Stephon Diggs in that game. And so now you add the 2 of those. And by the way, Dalton Schultz is a pretty damn good tight end as well. You know, and you throw Joe Mixon in the backfield. You got to give credit where it's due. They couldn't have done this without the Browns trade, but they did it. They did it, and they rebuilt an entire franchise in 1 year and won a division and a playoff game. And they've gotten exponentially better from last year. But as a receiving core, and there's some damn good ones out there in this league, but I just don't see how you put anybody above Houston.
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head there, talking about that each of those three guys does something a little bit different. They bring something different to the equation. That's what kind of sets them above Miami for me. One other team that I will throw out there, definitely not up there yet. A lot of this is dependent on a guy that we haven't seen yet, but the Chicago Bears have a sneaky good receiving core. I mean, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, two legitimate number ones. Look, if Roma Duze is all he's cooked up to be, that's a team. Look, I don't think they're going to be in that top two level yet, but that's something to definitely look out for in terms of receiving rooms across the NFL. I mean, that's scary. And Cole Kmet too, as the tight end.
But don't forget, and I think that it's very important to mention this. Remember who the running back is in Chicago now. It's DeAndre Swift.
DeAndre Swift, yeah.
DeAndre Swift can catch a football with the
Oh,
best.
yeah.
He did it in Detroit. He did it in Philadelphia. And why am I bringing that up? Because you're not part of the receiving core? Because if you don't think that helps the receiving core, you're nuts. It's huge. It makes them better. And the only reason I haven't put them to the top or number two is because all the other players that we mentioned in the receiving course for those other two teams, I've already seen them do that.
Yeah.
I've already seen them do it, and other than Diggs, I've already seen them do it on the team that they're on right now. Roma Dunze, who I do love and I think will be great, has not caught a pass in a regular season NFL game. Keenan Allen, who I think is the best route runner in the NFL, not named Justin Jefferson, and especially over the last decade, has never caught a pass for the Chicago Bears. DJ Moore, he had a little thing working with Justin Fields, but he's new to Caleb Williams. These other guys have already, they've had a year under their belt with these guys, save Stephon Diggs, but he's going to do what he does.
We can give him the benefit of the doubt.
And that's the only reason that I did not put them there, because from an overall ability, I think they're right there with Chicago. But I already know that core in Miami and the production right there. So I'm going to give them the nod over Chicago right there. But I could make a real argument that those are the top three for sure.
Yeah, I would definitely think, at least in my eyes, it's Houston, Miami, and then it's everyone else kind of. But I think if we have the same conversation at the end of this season, if things go right for Chicago, there's a very good chance that they're right up there with them. I mean, talent all up and down the board. And, at the end of the day, it all comes down to Caleb, right? Because your receiving core is only as good as the guy who's getting them the ball, right? So at the end of the day, that's what it's going to come down to in my eyes.
Excuse me 1 second, Marco. Turn that phone off or I'm throwing you out the window. All right, thank you. Sorry about that. I had to yell at the boss for a little bit. Hey, I think that's a wrap. We said 45 or so. That's 50 minutes, and it was a lot of fun, man. And that's the beauty of it, is we only touched on 3 subjects here. This is going to be a 2 or 3-parter, man, because we got a lot more to do, a lot of heavy lifting to do before the NFL regular season gets underway in a few weeks here in September. So large time, Marco. Great way to spend a Friday night, man. I hope you had a good time.
Yeah, love talking football with you. Excited to, keep unveiling this series, keep talking some more, and just excited for football, man. I love football. How can you not, right?
Can you not? He's Marco Scuteri. I'm the Fish. Seabass, if you're nasty. This has been Marco and the Fish on the Walker Talks radio platform. That's a wrap for this one. We'll do another one next week, part 2 of this series, as we get ready for another NFL season. Marco, great job, brother. Have a wonderful weekend. I'll talk to you next week.
You as well. Talk to you later.